So now we know what a class is and what methods and properties are, as well as what inheritance is. We basically know OOP by now, but we don't yet know how to utilize it to its full potential. So in this lesson we're going to be covering dependency injection, and the easiest way to explain this to you is by demonstration. So I'm going to create two files, chest and lock, and these are both going to be classes, so class chest and class lock. Now the lock method will contain a protected property of isLocked, as well as a method called lock and a getter for isLocked as well. And all this is going to do is return this isLocked. Now inside here, all we're going to do is we're going to say this isLocked equals true. So we're locking the lock. Next, inside chest, we're going to have public function close, and this will have a argument called lock. So when we set this to true, it will automatically lock the chest. When we set it to false, it will close the chest but leave the lock unlocked. So here we can't do anything just yet because we can't access this property here. So the first thing that we have to do is fix that. So the first thing that we need to do is create a constructor, and we're going to inject a lock, and we're going to set that to this lock. And we're going to create that property up here, protected lock. Now what we can do is we can say this lock, lock, but we only want to do that if we tell this function to lock the chest. So if lock equals true, in fact that should be identical instead of equals, and that should all work fine. And what we could do is we could also have protected is closed, so is closed, and we could create a getter for that, is closed, return this is closed, and up here all we do is this is closed equals true. Then what we could do is we could add another method called open, and we could say if this lock is locked, then we want to unlock it. So the first thing that we have to do is create that method here, so public function unlock, and all we're going to do is set this isLocked equals false. So now what we can do here is we can say this lock unlock, so we're just invoking or calling that method, and then all we have to do is open the chest, so is closed equals false. So now let's test this out. In our index file we're going to include these two files, so chest and lock. Then we're going to instantiate new chest, and as our constructor parameter we're taking lock, so we need to say new lock. So let's just make sure that we're not going to get any errors, which is all fine. We're not getting any errors here. So what we can do now is we can say chest lock, and just to make sure that this is working, in fact that should be closed, and just to make sure that this is working we're just going to say here echo closed, and we'll do the same down here. We'll say echo opened. So now if we refresh, we get missing OK. We need to specify whether we want to lock the chest. So we'll just say we'll make this optional, so we'll set that to true by default, so we don't have to pass it in every time. There we go, the chest is closed. And then we can call chest open, and the chest is opened. Now one issue that we have here is we can, instead of passing in an object here, what we can do is just pass in a string, and then we're going to get an error because this lock method here doesn't exist on a string, obviously. So the way that we can fix that is by doing something called type hinting. All that does what all that means is that we specify the class before the argument. So now if we do this again and we hit refresh, we're going to get a catchable fatal error. And basically this ensures that anything we pass into this constructor here, at least the first argument, is going to be an instance of lock. So if we just fix this, hit refresh, we get the same result. And this is what we call dependency injection. Now I'm just going to give you a really quick example of a real life situation where this might be useful. So I'm going to delete these files and close them. Get rid of all of this. I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be called database.php, and then I'm going to create a new file called user.php, and again these are going to be classes, so class user and class database, and our database is just going to contain one method called query, and we'll probably pass in the SQL. And all we're going to do is we're going to say something like this PDO prepare SQL execute. And we're not going to be testing this or anything like that. This is just an example. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is add a method to our user class. So for this example, I'm going to say public function create, and this will take an array of data. So what we need to do now is we want to create a user by inserting him into the database. But how do we access this method here? Because we want to create a query inside of this class. Well, again, we use dependency injection. So we create a constructor. We type in this to database, and we'll call it DB for short, and we'll assign it to a property. Protected DB, and now all we have to do is say this DB query. Is that what we called it? Yep. And then we can say insert into users blah blah blah, and that will all work fine. All we have to do is include these files, database.php, user.php, and we'll say user equals new user, new database. And just for now, we'll get rid of this and we'll echo SQL. And then we can say user create, and we'll pass in an array, username, Terry. Hit refresh, and we get this query. And of course, if this was on a real site, we'd actually be executing this query and saving the user into a database. Now, another reason, I don't want to get into this too much because the video will be too long, but another reason for dependency injection is tight coupling. Now, something that you may have seen before is public static function get instance. And let's just remove all this dependency injection stuff. And in here would say something like, would create a property protected static instance, and would say if not static instance. And don't worry if you don't understand what this means. We'll be covering static in a future video. So if not static instance, so if it's null or if it's not set, then we're going to instantiate this class and store it in that variable. So static instance equals new self. So all this means is new database, but it means it's dynamic. So if we change this to something like DB, then we don't have to bother changing this. And then all we do is return static instance. Now inside our user class here, what we'd say is we'd say DB equals database get instance, and then we could say DB query like so, and we get the same result. But the problem with this is we're tightly coupling user to the database. So let's say, for example, we want to change a storage system. Let's say we want to store our users in a file instead. Well, every time that we get the database instance, we'd have to go through this class and change it to file. You see? So dependency injection eliminates this. All we'd have to change is the constructor. And you can even take additional steps by using things like the repository pattern, which we may be getting into later, to easily change your storage system.